who have earned more than $1 billion between 1996 and 2010, so-called super entrepreneurs, founded half the largest new companies created since the Second World War. The report by two professors studying in Stockholm says there is a strong correlation between super entrepreneurship and low tax rates, a low regulatory burden and high levels of philanthropy. So what are the most important conditions for the creation and encouragement of super entrepreneurs, and what are the implications for the countries they operate in and equality? Well, the report was produced by the Centre for Policy Studies. Its director, Tim Knox. He's with me now. Tim, thanks very much indeed for joining us on Share Radio.
Good afternoon.
Let's focus in. What exactly are super entrepreneurs, and what was the basis of the report? What sort of selection did you look at?
The authors looked at the billionaires reported every year in Forbes magazine, and they went back to 1996. They listed all the individuals concerned and focused exclusively on those super entrepreneurs who had actually created their own business. As it happens, there turned out to be almost exactly 1,000 such individuals across the world, and from that database they were able to correlate super entrepreneurship with particular characteristics in countries.
Yes, because the sort of the subtext of the title of the book, Super Entrepreneurs and How Your Country Can Get Them. So you actually looked at, and the authors looked at, what were the common features of super entrepreneurs and the common features of the countries that most produced them. Which were the most productive countries for super entrepreneurs?
Well, it's no surprise to see that the United States is very high up the list, but also, in fact, it's Hong Kong, which has the highest rate of super entrepreneurs at about 3 self-made billionaires per million inhabitants. The UK does not so well, but along with Ireland, it is the highest. It is the country with the highest rate of super entrepreneurship in Europe, which is encouraging. But if you compare the US with the whole of Europe, the US has 4 times the rate of super entrepreneurship, and that should lead to some interesting questions.
Indeed. I'll try and make the next one. What is it about the United States that is so productive of these entrepreneurial people?
One always has to be cautious about making sweeping generalizations, so as I'm about to do that, forgive me. But obviously the culture of a country is incredibly important, and the whole history of America and the American dream is crucial to that. But there are specific characteristics. As you said before, low tax rates are essential, low regulatory burden. The enforcement of property rights is crucial, of course, as well. What is the point of taking substantial risks, leaving a probably well-paid career, if you are lucky enough to make it, you feel that the government might end up taking your assets away, as has been seen in parts of the former Soviet Union. So that combination of features is common to those countries with high rates of entrepreneurship, and you can see that where those features don't exist at all, as in much of the developing world, then you find very little super entrepreneurship as well.
That point about tax is very relevant right across the world, but very relevant in this country in the run-up to an election. It's trotted out very often that the broadest back should bear the greatest burden. I'm just wondering, when an entrepreneur has got to this sort of level, there is an argument that they ought to be taxed as a result. But at what point should that tax be imposed? Because you don't want to discourage people being entrepreneurial and successful and generating money and generating tax. So that's a key debate, a key point about the tax levels. I guess there is some sort of optimum level of taxation, and perhaps at certain points in their progress to becoming super entrepreneurs.
Well, you are stating the case for the Laffer curve very, very eloquently. in Britain, we should remember that the top 0.05%, i.e. one person in every 2,000 pays 14% of all income tax. The top 1% of earners pay 30%. So there's no question that those with the broadest back do already pay make an extraordinary contribution to the overall tax rate. And when we hear these policies of envy coming from the Labour Party, but also more widely, sadly, then we should be very, very wary indeed of just assuming that we can squeeze the golden goose ever harder. The goose will run, and these individuals are likely to be highly mobile. So, yes, they should pay a higher, a reasonable burden of taxation. Do they presently? I think the numbers I quoted suggested that they certainly do. When it comes to the specific taxes, the finding which was most impressive was the extraordinary strong correlation between capital gains tax and super entrepreneurship. That really does seem to have a crucial element in the whole story. And that is one area which we would like to see more positive noises coming from the Conservative Party. Their announcement today on the triple lock on taxes is a wonderful step. It does, as well as guaranteeing reasonably low rates of tax, it also provides that other essential necessity for super entrepreneurs, that is stability.
Yes.
People need to know what is happening. People need a sense of certainty when when embarking on what is inevitably a very risky venture.
Yes, because as you say, their mobility is enormous, and particularly the mobility of their funds, most definitely. Another aspect of that argument is that super entrepreneurs, well, one side of the argument is that they've got to where they are on the backs of the poor by extorting them. The other side of the argument is that they've actually created new value and created jobs. I suppose there are examples of both through history, but I would imagine you'd come down on the side of them that super entrepreneurs actually create new value, do create new jobs, and perhaps even create new industries.
You only have to look at what's happened across the IT and mobile phone world to see that that is exactly true. There's also an important distinction between invention and innovation. Invention is what one might classify as the pure research mainly conducted in universities across the world. And you can look back to the Soviet Union, for example, and they had brilliant scientists. They had brilliant, they came up with brilliant products, which is not recognized enough. But what they didn't have was any innovation. In other words, taking the new products to the marketplace. And that is where super entrepreneurship really is crucial. And you can see the success of, obviously, companies like Apple, but hundreds of other companies throughout America and the rest of the world, where innovation has meant the commercialization of new products, new markets, new ways of doing things, which not only make the entrepreneurs behind the innovation immensely rich, but they also enrich all our lives. It is unthinkable, it would have been unthinkable 30 years ago that we carry around the world's knowledge inside our on a gadget the size of a cigarette packet.
Yes. That
was the result of successful entrepreneurship, and without it, we would all be immensely poorer.
Yeah. It is extraordinary, isn't it? There are times when I have to pinch myself to think that I could, on that tiny device, I actually use an iPad, but that still tiny device, that you do have access to, as you say, all the world's knowledge. Even 10 years ago, I wouldn't have dreamt it was possible. And as a child, I did actually dream of something that would happen like this. But for it to actually be available is just, what a wonderful time to be alive where that is possible.
I couldn't agree more. And it's not. And what is even more extraordinary is that is not the preserve of the rich or the super rich or even the middling rich. I believe a smartphone is now considered an essential for life. It has permeated every level of society. It goes so far as in Africa, it revolutionizes the daily life of subsistence farmers. 10 years ago, they would have had to set off to market, not knowing what the price of their products would be. They would be entirely at the mercy of the traders at the marketplace for setting the price of their goods. Now they can establish a price, and they travel to market when it's good for them and when they know the price is right for them. It's an extraordinary achievement which raises living standards for billions of people around the world, and that is the best example of super entrepreneurship.
Indeed, in Africa, say in their payment systems, for example, they're almost missing out a stage in classic Western economic evolution. They've jumped a stage because of the development of these new IT systems.
Exactly, and very interestingly, that is very much a way of sidestepping not only the existing institutions but also government. This is the free market at work, where both parties have equal access to the information by which prices are set.
Just going back to super entrepreneurs, and you did mention in an earlier answer about Russia and the old Soviet Union and the innovation that was there but didn't really get used and taken to market. I'm just wondering what you make of the oligarchs. I mean, for example, Roman Abramovich, say. I guess you wouldn't class him as a super entrepreneur because the way he made his 7.5 billion pounds or dollars wasn't through entrepreneurship. It was more, well, I suppose it's entrepreneurial, but he spotted a good time at a point in a country's development where he could get onto the natural resources. But would he fall into the bracket of a super entrepreneur?
He would be a borderline case where the people who would not be considered as super entrepreneurs are those who have basically ripped off the state through cozy cartels with the government and dubious privatizations, which were all too frequent in the early days of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. We were very careful to take those individuals out. Obviously, we were equally careful to take out the sort of the drug lords who also feature in the Forbes list, and some of the kleptocratic dictators of various parts of the world. We focused exclusively on those people who had built innovative businesses, who had made their own $1 billion, and who were identifiably creative as opposed to destructive of value.
Do they, as human beings, share certain characteristics? Maybe in their personality, maybe they have to be sociopaths, I don't know, or psychopaths. I mean, psychopaths in not at the murderous sense, but psychopaths in that they have perhaps more control over their emotions and they're more single-minded. There have been recent studies of sociopathy that actually look at things that don't involve serial murder, but are actually attributes in terms of higher management, in terms of getting on in the world. And do they have certain levels of education? Perhaps they are uneducated people.
As it happens, today's super entrepreneurs tend to be extraordinarily highly educated. In the US, I'm just reaching for my numbers here, so forgive me, only 16% of super entrepreneurs don't have a college degree compared to over half in America. They're 5 times more likely to hold a PhD degree than the general population, and a third of American super entrepreneurs actually went to one of the 14 top universities compared to 1% of the general population. So they are likely to be highly educated. Obviously, they're going to be likely to be highly intelligent. In relation as to whether they're sociopaths or not, I'll pass on that one, but they are certainly going to be extremely confident individuals. They're going to be people who are likely to have been in successful and well-paid management positions, and they are going to be taking a huge jump to start up their new companies with absolutely no certainty of success. to do that requires a certain degree of self-confidence, which is likely to be outside the average. They're also going to be extremely hardworking. There's no question that the early days of entrepreneurship are always going to be extremely difficult and will be challenging in time and effort. And finally, of course, they will also have to be extremely lucky. However well made the business case, however brilliant and inspired the individual, it's a very, very tricky road to take.
And on that tricky road, there will be failures. There have been quite a lot of studies on the whole business of failure, that failure is actually perhaps a good thing if you learn from it.
A very good thing. And many of the super entrepreneurs have clearly tried and failed, and eventually succeeded. Again, is that side... It is an indication of one of the essential attributes of the entrepreneur is determination, the ability to keep going when all around say the time is to give up.
Yes. Which brings me also to another attribute of super entrepreneurs, their willingness to devote time and their fortune to philanthropy, the giving of great chunks of their fortune. That has become a very important element of this whole thing, and indeed there's almost a fashion towards philanthropy. It's the thing that you should do when you are that fabulously successful and wealthy.
And what a very good thing that is. It is no surprise to find that those countries with the highest rate of super entrepreneurs are those with the highest rate of philanthropy. Obviously, the very rich can afford to give away more, but I think it goes deeper than that. It is that sense, as you find in America, of self-reliance, of independence that drives the entrepreneur. And when they have made their fortune, it is then incumbent and natural for them to wish to give a large proportion of their fortune away. And this can only be a good thing, which should be welcomed by the population, and we should hold back that sense of envy which so often seems to percolate any discussion of this sort.
Because it is within their power to actually make significant changes to planetary problems. I'm thinking here of Bill Gates perhaps tackling malaria. There are examples where real progress can be made with such enormous wealth.
Absolutely. And what the individual philanthropist with large resources can do is to target a particular problem and devote not only very significant sums of money, but also the management practices which have helped them create their business in the first place. So would I prefer Bill Gates to be investing billions in combating malaria over an equally well-funded UN program? Well, I suspect Bill Gates would actually be able to come up with a better result for the same amount of money.
What is the role of government in all this? We've mentioned a few things, that's to say the tax rates and law and so on, and predictability of the society and so on. But I'm wondering if it might be better for government to stand back and let it happen, or are those that take the view that perhaps there is actively government policy that could be decided upon to create an environment where this sort of thing might arise?
I think the best illustration of what government should not do was the Lisbon strategy, which the European Union embarked on in 2000. And the aim of that strategy was, and the words which actually opened the whole document, the intention was to make the EU the most competitive and dynamic, knowledge-based economy in the world, capable of sustainable economic growth, with more and more better jobs and greater social cohesion by 2010. I think it's quite clear that the Lisbon programme was a calamitous failure, and one can look at why that approach completely failed. It was all predicated on the government could somehow create a science park here, have an enterprise zone there, have a special scheme for investment tax relief there. Those policies quite clearly don't succeed. No self-regarding entrepreneur sets out in business thinking, I'm just going to call up my accountant now and he can give me some advice on how to apply for that grant, that loan, that tax relief. They don't. They start with a passion, with a brilliant idea, with the conviction that they can do something which no one else can. And government is unable to operate in that sphere. So what government can do best is to keep out of the way. And that is so clear. You look at America, you look at Hong Kong, you look at Israel, where again the very high rates of entrepreneurship. Those countries don't indulge in those kind of programs. And closer to home in the UK, one should question whether the extremely well-intentioned schemes such as enterprise investment schemes and so on, do they really, really help the entrepreneurs? Certainly they will help some, but the great bulk of them will be far more interested in creating brilliant products than in filling in forms.
Yes, over the years and over all the elections that I've watched as well, all governments of all shades have said that they want to cut red tape and the regulation that hinder the small companies. Because, of course, all super entrepreneurs began with small companies. I guess that couldn't be anything other than that case. And yet very few governments in power have succeeded in pulling back that jungle and tangle of red tape. It really ought to be something that they concentrate on, given that the power of any country's economy, say for example Germany, depends, the Mittelstand in Germany, it depends on the small and medium-sized companies. I am always and continuously surprised that they cannot see that.
I agree. And the intention is there. The devil is always in the detail, sadly. Regulations tend to be warmly welcomed by the established players in the market. They know what the rules are, they will have a compliance department and so on. For large companies, regulation is a very useful anti-competitive device. And of course, the would-be entrepreneur has no voice. They can't afford the lobbying power, the lawyers, accountants and so on, to change the system as it is. Luckily, the energy of the entrepreneurs is normally great enough to be able to overcome such things, but we should always be very, very wary of clever schemes to make the tax system slightly more attractive to that interest group or the other interest group. We should always be very careful of the unintended consequences of well-meaning regulations, which so often damage the would-be entrepreneur who, as I say, has no voice in the whole matter.
And there seems to be almost, well, certainly in this country, developing, less so in America, sort of a climate of envy, if you like, a climate of opposition to those that have become rich and successful. I wonder where that comes from. In America, you look up to someone that's achieved that and achieved great wealth through their own hard work and inventiveness. But in this country, oddly, there seems to be that air of, oh, look at them, why aren't they being taxed more? That politics of envy. Where does that come from, do you think?
The politics of envy has been around for ever, I'd imagine, and is something which should always be challenged. I think it's become exacerbated since the financial crisis, and it's certainly true that since 2007-8, the rich have got richer, while the rest of us have at best stayed more or less level over the last 6 or 7 years. But the reasons for why the rich have got richer are not to do with entrepreneurship at all. It's largely to do with government programs such as qualitative easing, which have sort of inflated their asset values substantially, which have inflated house prices substantially. If we want to see where real wealth for everyone comes from, then we should look at how entrepreneurship works, and we should work out what government should do, and above all, what government should not do, so that people are free to pursue their passion and to create successful businesses and successful products.
And there is a point where if an individual becomes a multi-billionaire, then they almost get beyond a government intervention, that there's no tax regime that would ever do anything to prevent them being multi-billionaires. There is almost a point where that amount of money cannot help but generate a lot more money.
Yes, and again, we must always remember that they do contribute enormously to society, not only in the fantastic products that they create, not only in the thousands and millions of jobs that they create, but also, of course, in the taxes they pay. Envy is maybe a natural human reaction. It's also considered a sin by most of the major monotheistic religions, and it maybe should be a sin which we should resist the temptation of falling into.
Tim, thanks very much for being with us. That was extremely interesting. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.
That was Tim Knox, who's Director of the Centre for Policy Studies. Thanks for being with us. And that brings us round to the weather now.